I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, watching the city lights blur past our car window. 10 years of marriage, and tonight was supposed to be perfect. I'm Lana, and in exactly 47 minutes, my entire world would shatter into a million pieces. You seem nervous, Matthew said, his hand resting on my knee. The same hand that had held mine through countless moments, good and bad. The same hand that I would soon learn had been slowly strangling everything I held dear. Just excited, I replied, forcing a smile. It's not every day we celebrate our 10th anniversary. The restaurant was exactly what you'd expect for such a milestone. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and the soft murmur of expensive conversations. Matthew's family had already arrived, occupying the private room he'd reserved. His sister Susan rushed to embrace me, her perfume overwhelming. "The golden couple!" she exclaimed, pulling back to examine my face. "Lana, you look absolutely radiant." I noticed Emily, my 16-year-old daughter, sitting quietly in the corner. She seemed unusually tense, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, moving toward her. Before she could answer, Matthew clinked his glass, commanding everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying that familiar authority that had first attracted me to him. The room fell silent. 10 years ago, I married this beautiful woman, he began, gesturing toward me, and tonight, I think it's time for some honesty. My stomach dropped. There was something in his tone, something cruel I'd never heard before. "Lana," he continued, "you've been a wonderful wife, but as they say, all good things must come to an end." The room grew impossibly quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "I'm filing for divorce," he declared, his lips curving into what I can only describe as a smirk. "And I have an announcement that might explain why." He walked over to Emily, placing his hand on her shoulder. She flinched, but didn't move away. "Emily and I have fallen in love." The words hit me like a physical blow. Several gasps echoed around the room, followed by murmurs of shock. But then, to my horror, I watched as his family's expressions transformed from surprise to acceptance, even approval. Susan actually smiled, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The tension in her shoulders, the fear in her eyes. This wasn't love. This was predation. "Emily," I said softly, "come here, baby." She practically leaped from her chair, crossing the room to stand beside me. Her hand found mine, squeezing it tight. Matthew's smile faltered slightly. "Now, Lana, don't make this difficult. Emily and I—" "Stop talking." My voice was ice. "My 16-year-old daughter? Really, Matthew?" He straightened his tie, regaining his composure. "She's very mature for her age, and these things, well, they just happen." His family nodded in agreement, like this was all perfectly normal. Like my husband hadn't just announced his intentions toward my child. I felt Emily trembling beside me, and something inside me solidified. 10 years of suspicious business trips, of mysterious phone calls, of documents hastily hidden when I entered rooms, it all clicked into place. "Well," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning through my veins, "I suppose I should thank you for making this so public." Confusion flickered across his face. I smiled, the kind of smile that promises war. "See you in court, Matthew." His smug expression wavered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I replied, gathering my purse and wrapping an arm around Emily, "that you really should have checked what your stepdaughter was doing when she was helping in your home office all these years." The color drained from his face as Emily and I walked toward the door. Behind us, I heard Susan's sharp intake of breath and Matthew's chair scraping against the floor. "Lana, wait." But we were already gone, stepping into the cool night air. Emily's hand was still in mine, steady now. "Mom," she whispered, "I have everything. Everything he did, everything he said. All of it." I pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I know, baby, I know." I'd raised a smart girl after all. While Matthew had been plotting his sick little game, we'd been building a case that would destroy him. As we climbed into a taxi, I caught a glimpse of Matthew through the restaurant window, his face contorted with rage. He thought he had all the power, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing: never underestimate a mother protecting her child. The game was just beginning, and I intended to win. The morning after the anniversary disaster, I sat across from Royal Ramirez in his corner office, watching him flip through the files Emily and I had compiled over the past year. This is... He paused, adjusting his glasses. Remarkable, Lana. How long have you suspected? The embezzlement? About 2 years, I replied, reaching for my coffee. But I needed proof. That's where Emily came in. Royal spread several documents across his desk. Bank statements, emails, and photographs created a paper trail of Matthew's corruption. And your daughter gathered all this? He never saw her as a threat, I said, bitter smile playing on my lips. Just his young, naive stepdaughter who loved helping in his office, the perfect cover. A knock at the door interrupted us. Emily entered, clutching her laptop. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much. I found more, she announced, setting the computer down. Remember those weekend trips he took to the Cayman Islands? Royal leaned forward. Show me. Emily pulled up a series of encrypted emails. He's been moving money through shell companies, lots of it, and look who helps manage the accounts. Susan, I breathed, recognizing the name on the documents. His own sister. There's something else, Emily said, her voice shaking slightly. She pulled out her phone and played an audio recording. Matthew's voice filled the room. Once the divorce is final, we'll transfer everything offshore. Lana won't see a penny. And Emily, sweetheart, we can finally be together. My stomach churned at his sickening tone. Emily's hand trembled as she stopped the recording. He started suggesting things about 6 months ago, she explained, not meeting my eyes. I played along, pretending to be flattered. It made him careless. He'd leave his office unlocked, his computer logged in. I reached across the desk and grabbed her hand. I'm so sorry you had to do that, baby. Don't be, she said firmly. He deserves everything that's coming to him. Royal cleared his throat. This is excellent work, but we need more. Specifically about the offshore accounts. Do you have any contacts inside his company? Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I might know someone. Jarrett Cox. Matthew fired him last year when he started asking too many questions about the company's finances. I dialed Jarrett's number, putting him on speaker. Lana? His voice crackled through. I heard about what happened at the restaurant. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, Jarrett. I'm with my lawyer and we need your help. Remember those irregularities you found in the Asian market investments? You mean the ones that got me fired? Yeah, I kept copies of everything. Matthew thought he'd destroyed all the evidence, but I'm not an idiot. Royal interjected, Mr. Cox, would you be willing to testify? Against Matthew? In a heartbeat. That bastard destroyed my career. I'll bring you everything I have tomorrow morning. After ending the call, Royal sat back, a satisfied look on his face. With Jarrett's evidence added to what you already have, we can nail him on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and... He glanced at Emily. Other charges. My phone buzzed. A text from Susan. We need to talk. Coffee, just us girls. I showed it to Royal, who nodded slowly. Meter, wear this. He pulled a small recording device from his desk drawer. We need to know what she knows. As Emily and I left Royal's office, she suddenly stopped in the hallway. Mom, what if it's not enough? What if he still wins? I turned to face her, seeing not just my brave daughter who'd helped gather evidence, but also the scared girl who'd been manipulated by a predator. Listen to me, I said, holding her shoulders. Matthew thinks he's untouchable because he's always gotten away with everything. But he made 2 fatal mistakes. He underestimated you, and he forgot that I've been watching him for years. We have the evidence, we have the witnesses, and most importantly, we have the truth. She nodded, straightening her spine. When are you meeting Susan? In an hour, I replied, checking my phone. At that pretentious cafe she loves. Be careful, Emily warned. She's almost as bad as he is. I hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Don't worry, Susan thinks she's coming to negotiate. She doesn't realize she's walking into a trap. As we headed to the elevator, I felt a surge of determination. Matthew had spent years building his house of cards, thinking himself invincible. Now, piece by piece, we would watch it fall, and I would make sure he felt every single moment of it. The cafe was busy when I arrived, but I spotted Susan immediately, perched at a corner table like a vulture waiting for its prey. The recording device felt heavy against my ribs. "Lana, darling," she cooed, rising to air-kiss my cheek. "I took the liberty of ordering your usual vanilla latte." "How thoughtful," I replied, sliding into my seat, though I switched to black coffee months ago, less sugar. Her perfectly painted smile flickered. "Of course, my mistake. Like the mistake of helping your brother hide millions in offshore accounts?" The coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Grand Cayman Bank, account number 84793. I started reciting, watching her face pale. Should I continue? She set her cup down carefully, manicured nails clicking against the porcelain. "What do you want?" "The truth would be nice, starting with how long you've known about Matthew's plans for my daughter." Susan leaned forward, dropping her voice. "Listen, Lana, Emily is practically a woman now. These things happen. If you fight this, you'll lose everything. Matthew has connections." "Like Judge Harrison," I interrupted. "The one he's been bribing?" Another crack in her composure. "These are dangerous accusations." "No, Susan, these are facts. Facts I can prove." The door chimed and Jarrett walked in, right on schedule. He nodded at me before taking a seat at the adjacent table, close enough to hear everything. Susan's eyes darted between us. "Who is that?" "Just another piece of the puzzle you and Matthew didn't clean up properly." Her voice turned sharp. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you a chance," I corrected. "One chance to do the right thing before everything comes crashing down." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You really think you can take on Matthew? He'll destroy you." "Like he destroyed Jarrett?" I gestured to the next table. "Tell her what happened, Jarrett." He turned in his chair. "Hello, Susan. Remember me? The accountant your brother fired for finding his money laundering scheme?" The color drained from her face. "That was a misunderstanding." "The SEC doesn't think so," Jarrett cut in. "They were very interested in the documents I saved." Susan's hand shook as she reached for her purse. "This conversation is over." "One more thing," I said, pulling out my phone. "Emily wanted me to play something for you." I hit play on one of the recordings. Matthew's voice filled our corner of the cafe. "Susan's handling the transfers. Once you're 18, Emily, we'll have everything set up. A new life. Just us." "Stop," Susan whispered, looking sick. "Just stop." That's what Emily wanted to say, too. Multiple times. But your brother wouldn't listen. She stood abruptly, knocking her coffee over. "You don't understand. He'll come after all of us." "No, Susan, we're coming after him. The only question is, which side of the courtroom do you want to be on?" As she hurried out, Jarrett moved to my table. "Think she'll flip?" "She's scared," I said, watching her through the window as she practically ran to her car. And scared people make mistakes. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Mom, come home now. Found something huge in his private email." "I have to go," I told Jarrett. "Meet us at Royal's office tomorrow morning?" He nodded. "I'll bring everything I have. And Lana, be careful. Matthew's not going to take this lying down." I drove home quickly, finding Emily at the dining room table, her laptop open and her face pale. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward me. The email was dated 3 months ago, sent to a private account in Switzerland. My heart stopped as I read the contents, details of a plan so elaborate, so cruel, it took my breath away. "He was never going to let us go," Emily whispered. "He was going to—" "I know, baby." I pulled her close, my mind racing. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. My phone rang, Royal's number flashing on the screen. "Lana," he said without preamble, "we need to move fast. Matthew just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." "He's going to try to liquidate everything," I realized. "Exactly. Whatever you and Emily found, bring it now. We're filing for an emergency injunction tonight." I looked at my daughter, saw the determination in her eyes matching my own. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. As we gathered our evidence, I couldn't help but think about Susan's warning. Matthew would come after us with everything he had. But what he didn't know was that we were ready. More than ready. The war was about to begin, and we had just found our nuclear option. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Matthew strutted in, flanked by 3 expensive lawyers. His confident smirk faltered when he saw Jarrett sitting behind our table, manila folders stacked neatly in front of him. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Martinez entered. Not Judge Harrison, as Matthew had expected. His legal team exchanged worried glances. "Your Honor," Royal began, standing, "we're here seeking an emergency injunction against Mr. Elliott's attempts to liquidate company assets, and we have evidence of extensive financial fraud." Matthew's lead lawyer jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. These are baseless accusations from a vindictive, soon-to-be ex-wife." "Baseless?" Royal raised an eyebrow. "Let's start with Exhibit A." He projected the first document onto the courtroom screen, a series of wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. Matthew's face tightened. "These transfers," Royal continued, "total over $12 million in the past 18 months alone, money that mysteriously disappeared from company accounts. Business investments," Matthew's lawyer argued, "completely legitimate." "Really?" Royal clicked to the next slide. "Then perhaps you can explain why they were routed through shell companies owned by Mr. Elliott's sister." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I noticed Susan, sitting in the back, shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Furthermore," Royal pressed on, "we have testimony from a former employee regarding these transactions." Jarrett stood, walking to the witness stand. As he was sworn in, I saw Matthew's knuckles turn white as he gripped the table. "Mr. Cox," Royal began, "please tell the court about what you discovered last year." "I was the senior accountant," Jarrett testified. "I found discrepancies in the Asian market accounts, large sums being diverted through a series of shell companies. When I brought this to Mr. Elliott's attention, he fired me and threatened to destroy my career if I spoke up." Matthew leaned forward, whispering furiously to his lawyers. One of them stood. "Your Honor, this is clearly a disgruntled ex-employee seeking revenge." "I have the original documents," Jarrett interrupted, "with Mr. Elliott's signature authorizing each illegal transfer, and emails discussing how to hide them from the board and shareholders." The judge leaned forward. "I'd like to see those documents." As the evidence was presented, I watched Matthew's composure crack. His eyes darted around the room, finally landing on Emily in the gallery. The predatory look that crossed his face made my blood boil. "Your Honor," Royal said, "we have one more witness, Emily." Matthew's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, she's a minor." "A minor," Royal countered, "who Mr. Elliott has claimed he intends to marry. I believe her testimony is highly relevant." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Emily walked to the stand, her head high. She looked directly at Matthew as she was sworn in. "Emily," Royal began gently, "can you tell us about the documents you found in Mr. Elliott's home office?" "Objection," Matthew's lawyer shouted. "Any documents obtained without consent were in plain sight," Emily cut in. "On the computer I was explicitly given access to for homework help." The judge overruled the objection. Emily pulled out her phone. "I also recorded conversations," she continued, "like this one from last month." Matthew's voice filled the courtroom. "Once we get rid of your mother, we'll have everything. The money's already moved. She'll never find it." The recording continued, becoming increasingly inappropriate. Several jurors looked disgusted. Susan quietly stood and slipped out of the courtroom. "Your Honor," Royal said, "we have extensive evidence of financial crimes, attempted fraud, and inappropriate conduct with a minor. We ask that all company assets be frozen immediately." The judge studied Matthew, who was now visibly sweating. "Mr. Elliott, would you like to address these allegations?" Matthew stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. I can explain—" "Save it for the criminal trial," the judge cut in. "I'm granting the emergency injunction. All assets are frozen pending full investigation. And Mr. Elliott," she added, her voice steel, "I'm issuing a restraining order. You are to have no contact with Emily or her mother." As the gavel fell, Matthew lunged toward our table. "You lying little—" Two court officers grabbed him before he could finish. Emily didn't flinch, staring him down as he was pulled away. Outside the courtroom, Royal smiled. "This is just the beginning. The criminal charges will be filed tomorrow." I hugged Emily close, watching Matthew being led away in handcuffs, his perfect world crumbling around him. But something in his eyes, a dangerous glint of desperation, told me this wasn't over. "He still has something planned," Emily whispered, seeing it too. "Let him try," I replied. "We're ready." The criminal trial began 3 weeks later. I sat in the front row, watching Matthew's mask of confidence slip further with each new piece of evidence. His expensive suit couldn't hide the toll of jail time. He'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The prosecution calls Susan May to the stand. The district attorney announced. Matthew's head snapped up as his sister walked to the witness box. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Ms. May, the DA began, please tell the court about the offshore accounts you managed for your brother. Susan gripped the stand, her voice shaking. I helped Matthew move money through various shell companies. It started small, but over time... Objection, Matthew's lawyer interrupted. This witness was not offered immunity. Actually, the DA countered, Ms. May has entered into a cooperation agreement with the state. Matthew slammed his fist on the table. You treacherous bitch. Order. The judge's gavel cracked. Mr. Elliott, control yourself or you'll be removed. Susan continued, detailing years of financial manipulation. She described elaborate schemes to hide money, fake investments, and forged documents. With each revelation, Matthew's face grew darker. And what did your brother tell you about his plans regarding his stepdaughter? Susan dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. He said he'd been grooming her for months, that once she turned 18, they would disappear with the money. He laughed about it. The jury's disgust was palpable. One woman actually glared at Matthew, who was now whispering frantically to his lawyer. Next, the prosecution played Emily's videos. The courtroom watched in silence as Matthew appeared on screen, making inappropriate advances, discussing their future together, all while Emily pretended to be flattered while secretly recording everything. Your Honor, Matthew's lawyer stood. These videos were obtained without my client's consent. In a single-party consent state, the DA interrupted. Perfectly legal, as you well know. During a brief recess, Royal pulled me aside. Something's wrong. Matthew's too calm. What do you mean? He's got an ace up his sleeve. Watch Susan, she keeps checking her phone. Back in session, Matthew's defense began their case. His lawyer called a surprise witness, James Turner, the company's IT director. Mr. Turner, the lawyer began, what did you find when examining Ms. Emily's computer? Objection, Royal shot up. This witness wasn't on the list. Late discovery, Your Honor. Critical evidence came to light this morning. The judge allowed it. My stomach tightened as Turner testified. I found evidence of hacking, he claimed. Someone used that computer to illegally access company servers, plant false documents, and manipulate financial records. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Emily grabbed my hand, her face pale. He's lying, she whispered. I never... Royal stood. Your Honor, may I cross-examine? Proceed. Mr. Turner, when did you perform this analysis? This morning. And who ordered it? Ms. May. Royal smiled. The same Ms. May who just testified about her role in the fraud? The same Ms. May who's been sending text messages throughout these proceedings? Turner shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, Royal continued, I'd like to enter into evidence these messages, obtained through Ms. May's cooperation agreement. He projected a series of texts onto the screen. Messages between Susan and Turner, planning this false testimony. Messages with Matthew, orchestrating one final attempt to discredit Emily. Furthermore, Royal added, we have Mr. Turner's banking records showing a $100,000 deposit made this morning from one of the known shell companies. Turner's face crumpled. Matthew leaped up, pointing at Susan. You promised you deleted those messages. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Bailiff, remove Mr. Elliott. As Matthew was dragged out shouting, Turner broke down on the stand. He made me do it, he sobbed. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't testify. The DA stood. Your Honor, the state moves to add witness tampering and obstruction of justice to the charges. By day's end, Turner had joined Susan in making a deal with prosecutors. Matthew's last desperate play had backfired spectacularly. Outside the courthouse, Royal looked satisfied. That's the last card he had to play. Tomorrow we present the final evidence. Emily hugged me tight. Is it really almost over? Almost, I promised, watching Susan hurry to her car. She looked haunted, destroyed by her own brother's manipulation. That night, as Emily and I sat in our secured apartment, Royal's insistence after the death threats started, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? Watch the morning news. Some things can't be undone. I showed it to Emily, who immediately called Royal. "Don't worry," he said after I read him the message. "The police are monitoring everything. He's just trying to scare you." But as I looked at my daughter's worried face, I couldn't shake the feeling that Matthew had one final devastating move planned. The morning news hit like a bomb. I watched in horror as the anchor reported, "Breaking news. Massive data breach at Elliott Corp. Reveals thousands of compromised customer accounts. Sources say sensitive information was leaked by an inside source." My phone exploded with messages. Royals came first. "Turn on your TV, now." Emily burst into my room, laptop in hand. "Mom, they're trying to pin this on me. Look." She showed me social media posts already spreading like wildfire, claiming she had orchestrated the breach using her access to Matthew's computers. His supporters were calling for her arrest. "Get dressed," I ordered. "We're meeting Royal." As we rushed to the car, Jarrett called. "Lana, I know what Matthew did. The breach came from an external server in Russia, but he's manipulated the logs to point to Emily's laptop." "Can you prove it?" "Already working on it. But there's more. He's emptied the corporate pension fund. Thousands of employees just lost everything." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He's burning it all down." Royal's office was chaos when we arrived. Phones ringing nonstop, reporters camping in the lobby. He ushered us into a private conference room where Susan waited, looking terrified. "He's gone completely insane," she blurted out. "He called me last night, laughing about his scorched earth plan. Said if he's going down, he's taking everyone with him." "Where is he now?" Royal demanded. "Under house arrest at his penthouse," she replied. "But he's got people helping him, loyal employees who still believe in him." Emily opened her laptop. "Look what I found in his cloud backup." She played a video of Matthew, recorded recently in his penthouse. He stared into the camera, smirking. "By now you've seen the news," he said. "Poor Emily, such a troubled girl, hacking her stepfather's company. But that's just the beginning. Every hour more data will leak, more accounts compromised, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." "Actually," Jarrett said from the doorway, making us jump, "there is." He walked in, holding up a flash drive. "Remember that IT director who lied on the stand? He gave me access to the backup servers. I've got proof the breach came from Russia, and—" He smiled grimly, evidence that Matthew ordered it himself. Royal grabbed his phone. "I'm calling the DA. We need to move fast." Suddenly, Emily gasped. "The offshore accounts, they're being drained right now. Look." Her screen showed real-time transfers emptying the hidden accounts we'd frozen, millions disappearing by the second. "That's impossible," Susan whispered. "Those accounts were locked." "Unless someone with authorization unfroze them," I realized, staring at her. "Someone like you." She backed away, reaching for her purse. "I had no choice. He threatened my children." Royal blocked the door. "Susan, don't make this worse." "You don't understand," she sobbed. "He's got everything planned. The data breach, the pension fund, the accounts. It's all a distraction. His real target is—" She looked at Emily, horror in her eyes. My blood ran cold. "What did he plan for Emily?" Before she could answer, Jarrett's laptop pinged. "Someone's accessing the company's private jet records. A flight plan was just filed for tonight. Destination, Dubai." "No extradition," Royal muttered. My phone buzzed. A text from Matthew. Should have kept her away from computers. Too late now. Emily's laptop suddenly went black, then displayed a message. "Access granted. Download complete." "He's in my computer," she cried. "Everything's being wiped." Jarrett jumped into action, fingers flying over his keyboard. He's not just wiping it, he's planting evidence, making it look like Emily orchestrated everything. "Call the police," Royal ordered, already dialing. "We need officers at his penthouse now." But Susan was shaking her head. "He's not there. The house arrest ankle monitor? He switched it hours ago. He's already gone." My phone buzzed again. "Coming for what's mine. Say goodbye to Emily." The room erupted into action. Royal calling in favors, Jarrett tracing digital footprints, Susan finally breaking down and revealing more of the plan. But all I could focus on was Emily, my brave, brilliant daughter who had risked everything to expose this monster. Now he was trying to destroy her completely. "Mom," she said quietly, taking my hand. "I'm scared." "Listen to me," I replied, steel in my voice. "He thinks he's won. thinks he's destroyed everything, but he forgot the most important thing. What's that? I pulled out my own flash drive, the one I'd never told anyone about. I keep copies of everything, and I mean everything. For the first time that morning, Royal smiled. The hunter becomes the hunted. Exactly, I said, plugging in the drive. Time to end this, once and for all. Got him, Jarrett shouted, his laptop screen lighting up with coordinates. He's at the private airfield outside the city. Royal was already on the phone with the DA. We need that arrest warrant now. He's attempting to flee the country. I grabbed Emily's hand. Stay here with Jarrett. Susan, you're coming with me. What? No, I can't. You can and you will. I cut her off. Your brother needs to see your face when it all falls apart. Police sirens wailed as we raced to the airfield, Susan trembling in the passenger seat. 3 patrol cars flanked us, lights flashing. My phone was on speaker, connected to Jarrett and Emily. The jet's fueled and ready, Jarrett reported. But I've locked down the flight controls remotely. He's not going anywhere. We screeched to a halt at the airfield gates. Through the chain-link fence, I could see Matthew's private jet, its engines humming. A familiar figure was climbing the stairs. He's boarding, Susan cried. No, I smiled. He's trapped. The police burst through the gates, cars surrounding the jet. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. Matthew Elliott, a voice boomed over a megaphone. We have a warrant for your arrest. Exit the aircraft with your hands up. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the jet's door opened, and Matthew appeared, still wearing his expensive suit, but now disheveled and wild-eyed. You're too late, he shouted. The money's gone, all of it, and Emily's reputation is destroyed. I stepped forward, holding up my flash drive. You mean this money? His face contorted. What? While you were busy planning your grand escape, I was tracking every transfer, every account, every fake transaction. It's all here, and it's already been sent to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. You're bluffing, he snarled, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Tell him, Susan. His sister stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. The offshore accounts? I never actually unfroze them. Those transfers you saw? All fake. We were tracking where you tried to send the money. Matthew's face went from red to white. You betrayed me? No, brother. You betrayed yourself. My phone crackled. Mom, Emily's voice rang out. We've recovered everything from my laptop. Jarrett found proof the Russian hackers were hired directly by Matthew. We have the payment records. Matthew lunged down the stairs, but police officers tackled him before he could reach us. As they handcuffed him, he thrashed and screamed. You think this is over? I still have friends, powerful friends. Actually, Royal said, walking up with his phone out, you don't. The board of directors just voted unanimously to remove you and cooperate fully with authorities. They're quite interested in keeping themselves out of prison. The pension fund, Matthew started. Already recovered, I interrupted. You really should have changed your private banking passwords, dear. 10 years of marriage and you still used our anniversary date. His face crumpled as reality set in. Everything he'd built, every scheme he'd planned, was falling apart. Take him away, Royal nodded to the officers. And make sure he knows. Attempt to contact Emily again, and we'll add witness intimidation to the charges. As they led him to a police car, Matthew looked back at his sister. Susan, tell them you helped me. I did, she replied calmly. I told them everything. That's why I'm out here and not in handcuffs with you. The police car door slammed, and just like that, it was over. 10 years of manipulation, fraud, and betrayal ended in minutes. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Is it safe to come out now? All clear, baby. We did it. She arrived minutes later with Jarrett. As we watched Matthew's jet being searched by federal agents, Emily hugged me tight. They found 3 fake passports and offshore banking documents in the jet, Jarrett reported. He was planning to disappear completely. Royal cleared his throat. The DA wants to meet first thing tomorrow. With the new evidence, Matthew's looking at 20 years minimum, the federal charges alone. What about the company? Susan asked quietly. The board's appointing an interim CEO, Royal replied, and they're very interested in making things right with all the employees. I looked at my daughter, seeing the weight lift from her shoulders. Ready to go home? She nodded, then turned to Susan. Thank you for helping at the end. Susan wiped away tears. I'm so sorry. For everything. As we drove home, Emily finally smiled. Mom, Think we can take a vacation? Somewhere far away from all this? Absolutely, I replied, watching the police cars disappear into the distance with Matthew. But first, we have a court date tomorrow. One last time to watch him face justice. Good, she said firmly. I want to see his face when they read the verdict. So did I. After all, karma was finally catching up to Matthew Elliott, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreman stood. I gripped Emily's hand as we waited for the moment we'd fought so hard to reach. On the count of financial fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Matthew's shoulders slumped. On the count of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. His lawyers shuffled their papers nervously. On the count of attempted exploitation of a minor, Emily squeezed my hand tighter. Guilty. The list continued, each guilty verdict another nail in the coffin of Matthew's empire. When the foreman finished, the judge cleared her throat. Mr. Elliott, please rise. Matthew stood, his designer suit hanging loose on his frame, his arrogance finally shattered. You have been found guilty of serious crimes against not only your company and its employees, but against your own family. Your attempts to manipulate and exploit your stepdaughter show a particular moral bankruptcy that this court finds reprehensible. She paused, looking directly at him. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to the pension fund and affected employees. Your assets will be seized and liquidated to satisfy these obligations. The gavel cracked, and Matthew's legs gave out. As officers led him away, he looked back one last time. Emily, he called out weakly, I'm sorry. Save it, she cut him off, standing tall. I'm not your victim anymore. I'm the one who took you down. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Royal stepped forward, handling the press while Jarrett brought our car around. Mom, Emily said, tugging my sleeve. Look. Susan stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, clutching a thick envelope. Before they take everything, she said, holding it out, I wanted you to have this. It's the deed to the beach house in Maine. I bought it with my own money, before everything. It's yours now. I started to protest, but she shook her head. Please, let me do one right thing. You and Emily deserve a fresh start. Emily took the envelope. Thank you, Aunt Susan. The board meeting went well, Jarrett announced, joining us. They're implementing all new oversight procedures and... He grinned at me. They want you to join the ethics committee, Lana. I laughed. After all this, I think I'm done with corporate life. Actually, Emily said, pulling up something on her phone, I have a better idea. Remember that small tech security firm that helped us trace Matthew's hackers? They're looking for partners. She showed me the proposal she'd drafted. A new company focused on protecting others from the kind of fraud and manipulation we'd experienced, using our story to make a difference. I already ran the numbers, Jarrett added. With my technical experience and your insight into corporate fraud, we could help people, Emily finished. Stop other Matthews before they destroy more families. Royal emerged from the press crowd. Whatever you decide, the civil suits are settled. The company's insurance will cover the pension fund, and the asset liquidation should handle the rest. What about the employees? I asked. Already taken care of. The board approved emergency bonuses to offset any hardship, and they're implementing that whistleblower protection program Emily designed. My daughter blushed. It just made sense. No one should be afraid to speak up. Susan cleared her throat. I should go. My flight to Seattle leaves soon. Fresh start? I asked. She nodded. Teaching high school math. About as far from corporate finance as I can get. As she walked away, Emily pulled out the beach house keys. So, Maine? I looked at my daughter, seeing not the scared girl from that anniversary dinner, but a strong young woman who'd faced down evil and won. Maine, I agreed. But first, I want to hear more about this security firm idea. Already got the perfect name, she grinned. Phoenix Securities, because we help people rise from the ashes. Jarrett raised an eyebrow. I'm in if you are. I hugged Emily close, breathing in the fresh air of freedom. Behind us, the courthouse stood as a symbol of justice served. Ahead, the future stretched bright and clear. Phoenix Securities it is, I decided, but we're still taking that vacation first. Emily laughed, the sound pure and unburdened. "Deal, race you to the car." As I watched her run ahead, I felt the last weight lift from my shoulders. Matthew had tried to destroy us, but instead we'd emerged stronger, not as victims, but as survivors, as warriors. And somewhere in a prison cell, Matthew would have plenty of time to think about the women he'd underestimated, the family he'd betrayed, and the justice we'd fought so hard to win. We were finally truly free.
My name's Layla, a 34-year-old who thought she had it all sorted out. I was a part-time accountant, juggling numbers by day and living the simple, happy life I'd always wanted with Mark, my husband. He was a manager at a decent firm, and together, we were the picture of modest contentment. That was until his promotion turned our modest life into something unrecognizable. Initially, Mark's promotion felt like a blessing. "We've hit the jackpot, Layla," he exclaimed the night he got the news. His eyes sparkled with the same warmth I fell in love with. "You won't have to work anymore. How about you take care of our nest while I hustle for the both of us?" It sounded like a dream, but dreams often turn into nightmares. As the money flowed in, Mark's humility flowed out. His once gentle demeanor was replaced by an air of superiority that filled every corner of our home, suffocating me. He started coming home late, reeking of arrogance and expensive cologne. "Layla, this house looks like a dump. Can't you do better?" His words were like daggers, each one striking deep into my heart. "I'm trying, Mark. I'm doing all I can," I'd reply, my voice barely a whisper, trying to hold on to the fragments of the man I married. The house I once took pride in turned into a battlefield, with Mark as the relentless commander. "I didn't marry you to have a partner, Layla. I married you for comfort, for someone to clean up after me," he'd declare, his words slicing through the air like a blade. His cruelty knew no bounds. "You can't even give me a child. What good are you, Layla?" he'd shout, each word a blow to my womanhood. I'd look away, but he'd grab my chin, forcing me to meet his cold gaze. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. Is this what you want? To be a useless wife?" I'd swallow my tears, nodding along to his ruthless words, too broken to speak. The man I vowed to spend my life with had turned into my tormentor, finding joy in my despair. Even the parties, once a source of joy, became a stage for my humiliation. "Layla, make sure everything is perfect tonight. Mrs. Dawson doesn't like mediocrity," Mark would command, reducing me to a mere prop in his show of success. I'd spend hours preparing, trying to meet his impossible standards. But it was never enough. The steak was overcooked, the decor was tacky, and you, Layla, you were the biggest disappointment of the evening, he'd hiss after the guests left, each word a nail in the coffin of my self-esteem. Life with Mark had transformed into an exhausting routine of servitude. I, Layla, once his partner, was now nothing more than a shadow in my own home, a mere housekeeper in his eyes. Every evening was a replay of disdain. Mark would storm in, flinging his coat at me like I was a coat rack. "Here, deal with this mess," he'd bark, as if talking to an underling, not his wife. "I've got the laundry done, Mark. Dinner's almost ready too," I'd say, hoping to ease his mood, my words tiptoeing around his temper. "Dinner? You mean that slop you cook?" "Don't make me laugh, Layla," he'd scoff, his laughter void of any joy, just a sharp jab at my efforts. It wasn't just his words. It was his actions too. He'd leave a trail of his belongings around the house, a silent order for me to clean up after him. And if the food wasn't to his exact liking, into the bin it went, my hours in the kitchen dismissed with a flick of his hand. "Too salty, Layla. Are you trying to poison me?" he'd spit out, his words like venom. I followed the recipe, Mark. "I thought it was how you liked it," I'd mumble, my spirit withering under his constant critique. He didn't stop there. Mark knew I had nowhere else to go, no financial backup to fall back on. He made sure I remembered that every single day. "Where'd you spend the money this time, Layla?" "On more useless stuff," He'd sneer, poring over the expense receipts like a detective. Groceries, Mark. And some cleaning supplies, I'd reply, handing over the receipts, a proof of my innocence in his court of judgment. He'd scan every item, his eyes hunting for a mistake, a misstep. Cleaning supplies? What for? The house is still a mess, he'd say, his words slicing through the silence, cutting deeper than the sharpest knife. I was trapped in a cycle of endless scrutiny. Every penny I spent was a penny he earned, and he never let me forget that. I was accountable for every breath I took, every move I made, in the suffocating space that was once our shared home. Layla, you know the drill. Impress Mrs. Dawson, impress them all. Don't screw this up, Mark would remind me, his words a constant echo in the back of my mind. The kitchen became my battlefield, every dish a mission. I'd chop, stir, and season, hoping each flavor was just right. This sauce better be perfect, Layla. Don't make me regret letting you handle it, Mark would say, peering over my shoulder, his presence heavy, suffocating. I've got it, Mark. It'll be great, I'd assure him, my hands shaking, the pressure building like a storm. The hours before the guests arrived were a frantic rush. The clinking of dishes, the simmering of pots, the subtle alignment of cutlery. Every detail had to be flawless, not for pride, but for fear of Mark's wrath. As the guests started to arrive, the air would shift. Mark, the tyrant at home, transformed into Mark, the gracious host. Ah, Mrs. Dawson, what an honor to have you. Layla has outdone herself tonight, he'd boast, his arm around me, a hollow gesture, for the audience. The night would progress, a charade of laughter and clinking glasses. Mark's colleagues, oblivious to the reality, would praise the ambience, the food, the impeccable hostess. Layla, you've outdone yourself. This is exquisite, they'd compliment, their words a bitter reminder of my invisible chains. Oh, it's nothing. Just something I whipped up, I'd reply, my smile hiding the turmoil within, my hands aching from the effort to keep the facade alive. But the real performance began when the guests left. Mark's mask would fall off, his true colors, dark and cruel, splashing over the remains of the night. The steak was overdone, Layla. The decor, tasteless. And you were the biggest disappointment, he'd spit out, his words laced with venom, each syllable a strike to my already battered self. But the night wasn't over until Mark had his say, away from the prying eyes of the world. The salad was wilted, Layla. And those curtains? A tacky choice. You always find a way to embarrass me, he'd hiss, his words a torrent, washing away any sense of accomplishment I might have felt. I tried, Mark. I really did. Mrs. Dawson seemed to enjoy it. I'd defend weakly, my defense crumbling under his intense glare. Seemed? I don't pay you for seemed, Layla. I need perfection. You can't even get a simple party right, he'd retort, his voice cold, devoid of any understanding or love. The aftermath of the parties was always the same. The silence of the house echoed my loneliness, the leftover dishes a metaphor for my life with Mark, a mess, waiting to be cleaned up, waiting for a new day to start the charade all over again. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, each one bringing a heavier silence and a colder distance between Mark and me. It wasn't just the contempt or the harsh words anymore, it was something else, something more sinister, lurking in the shadows of our hollow home. Mark's late nights became more frequent, each return home later than the last, each excuse more flimsy than the one before. Work, Layla. It's all work. You wouldn't understand, he'd say, his words slurred, the stench of alcohol mixed with something sweeter, something unfamiliar, clinging to his clothes. I tried to ignore it, to bury my suspicions under the mountain of my daily chores. But the whispers in my mind grew louder, impossible to silence. Mark, you're home late again. Is everything okay at work? I'd ask, my voice shaky, tiptoeing around the truth I was too afraid to face. Everything's fine, Layla. Better than fine. Stop nagging, would you? He'd snap, his eyes avoiding mine, his body language screaming the lies his mouth wouldn't admit. The signs were there, bold and glaring. The late-night calls he'd quickly silence, the sudden spritz of cologne before he'd leave the house, the way his eyes stopped meeting mine. "Who was on the phone, Mark?" It sounded important. I'd inquire, my heart pounding against my chest, bracing for his reaction. "Business, Layla. Just business." "Why can't you just mind your own?" he'd retort, his impatience a thick veil, covering the truth. It wasn't just his words or his actions, it was the gut-wrenching feeling that crept up on me in the dead of night, the realization that the man I shared my bed with was a stranger, his thoughts, his desires, existing in a world I was no longer a part of. Mark's late returns had become the norm, each night a repeat of the last. His excuses were thin, his demeanor colder, each step echoing in the hollow space between us. The smell of alcohol had become a part of him, a constant reminder of the distance growing between us. "Mark, it's late. You smell of liquor again. Where were you?" I'd ask, my voice low, barely hiding the tremble of my fears. "It's none of your business, Layla. Just mind your chores and stop prying," he'd snap back, his words sharp, cutting through the tense air. The nights dragged on, each one longer than the last. Mark's presence in the house felt like a storm, unsettling and unpredictable. One night, it all came to a head. He stumbled through the door, more inebriated than usual, a cloud of unfamiliar perfume trailing behind him. "Here, deal with this," he slurred, tossing his coat at me like I was nothing more than a coat rack. "Clean it. I need it for tomorrow," he commanded before staggering off to bed, leaving me standing there, coat in hand, heart in pieces. As I started to shake out the coat, something unexpected fell to the floor. It was a document, official and ominous. I picked it up, my hands trembling, my mind racing. It was a divorce application, completed and signed. Mark's signature, a mark of the end, lay there, stark and final. I stood there, stunned, the paper heavy in my hands. Then, something unexpected happened. A laugh escaped my lips, not a laugh of joy, but one of realization. This was it, the last straw, the final insult to the injury that had been my life with Mark. But I said nothing to him. No, this wasn't a moment for words. This was a moment for action, for decisions, for change. I took a deep breath, the weight of the years bearing down on me, the weight of the decision lifting me. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't question. I didn't doubt. I made a choice to act, to move forward, to reclaim the life that had been mine before it became ours. Mark had made his move, and now it was my turn. The path wouldn't be easy, but the hardest decisions rarely are. That morning, the sun seemed to shine a bit differently, casting a new light on the familiar walls of the home I shared with Mark. I handed him his coat, freshly cleaned, a routine task that felt strangely final. He barely acknowledged it, his mind already on the day ahead. "Layla, what's for breakfast?" "Make it quick, I'm in a hurry," Mark said, his voice sharp, slicing through the quiet morning. I replied with a calm I hadn't felt in years. "It's almost ready, Mark. Your usual." He grunted in response, his attention fixed on his phone. As he ate, I noticed how the distance between us had grown, a chasm that no words or actions could bridge anymore. When he finished, he pushed the plate away and stood up, ready to leave for work. "Remember, Layla, we have guests tonight. Make sure everything is perfect, especially for Mrs. Dawson. And this place," he gestured around, "better be spotless." His words, once the dictators of my actions, now felt hollow, empty of the power they once held over me. "Of course, Mark. Everything will be ready," I said, the edges of my lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. After he left, the silence of the house enveloped me. It wasn't suffocating anymore, it was liberating. I looked at the divorce papers I had signed and filed at court. Each word on those pages was a step towards reclaiming my life, a life I had almost forgotten in the shadows of Mark's imposing presence. The next few days were a blur of newfound purpose. I updated my resume, scoured job listings, and even attended a couple of interviews. The world outside, which I had viewed through the tinted glasses of my married life, now opened up with colors of hope and possibilities. Then, one morning, as if on cue with the life I was slowly leaving behind, Mark announced another one of his parties. "Layla, we're having guests tonight. My team and Mrs. Dawson. I don't need to remind you how important this is. Get the house ready, and the dinner better be impressive." His words fell on deaf ears. The Layla he was addressing no longer existed. I wasn't the trembling, eager to please wife anymore. I was a woman on the brink of a new beginning, standing on the ashes of a life I was ready to leave behind. He left for work, and the house felt different. It felt like my space, not the battleground it used to be. I made myself a simple lunch, savoring each bite, each moment of quiet, knowing that the evening would bring the final act of the farce my marriage had become. As I sat there, eating, the realization of my newfound freedom filled me with a sense of peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't worried about the evening, about the guests, about Mark's impossible standards. I had stepped out of the role he had cast me in, shedding the character of the docile, subservient wife. The hours ticked by, and the time for the party approached. But the flurry of activity, the rush to impress, was absent. Instead, I sat there, a quiet observer of the life I was leaving behind. Mark would be home soon, expecting a house buzzing with preparations, the air filled with the aroma of a lavish dinner. But what he would come home to was the stark reality of a marriage that had crumbled, a partnership that was no more. I wasn't afraid. The fear that had once consumed me, that had dictated my every move, had dissipated, replaced by a resolve as strong as the morning sun that had ushered in this day of change. Evening had settled in when Mark barged through the door, the cold air sneaking in behind him as he forgot to close it. His eyes scanned the quiet house, expecting the usual hustle of party preparations. But there was nothing. Just silence, just me, standing calmly amidst the stillness. "What is this, Layla? Where's the dinner? The guests, they could be here any minute," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the empty space. I met his gaze, my voice calm, but firm. "There's no dinner, Mark. No party. We're divorced. I don't owe you anything anymore," I declared, the truth hanging heavy between us. His face went from anger to shock, his mouth opening and closing, struggling to grasp the reality I laid before him. "Divorced? What nonsense is this, Layla? You're talking crazy," he stammered, his composure slipping. "Not nonsense, Mark. Fact. Remember the divorce papers you had in your coat? I found them, signed them, and filed them. It's done," I said, each word deliberate, each syllable sealing the end of our farce. His shock turned to rage, his words a desperate attempt to regain control. "You fool. That was just to show my boss, Mrs. Dawson, to get her off my back. She's my lover. Do you think I got a promotion at work? I would never actually divorce you. She's old, Layla, way older and scarier than you. It was all for the promotion, don't you see?" He spat out, his words twisted, trying to weave a new web of lies. I listened, the absurdity of his excuses almost laughable. So, it was all a game? The boss, the divorce, all for a promotion? So you smelled like Mrs. Dawson's perfume? Or do you have another woman? I asked, my voice steady, my resolve unshaken. He laughed until he cried. "You're right, silly. I have a stunning mistress, young and beautiful. You and Mrs. Dawson are no match for her, I'm just playing with you." But his smirk faded, his words trailing off into silence as a cough echoed through the room. We both turned towards the sound, the forgotten open door framing the figure standing there. His boss, her expression cold and piercing, her eyes locked on Mark. His colleagues, a mix of confusion and disbelief on their faces. The room was still, the tension palpable. Mark's boss, her face a mask of fury, stood over him. "Mark, explain yourself. Was this all just a game for you? Using me to climb the career ladder? She demanded, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Mark, the color drained from his face, dropped to his knees. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation. No, you've got it all wrong. It's not like that at all. I respect you immensely. Please, you have to believe me. He pleaded, his hands clasped together, his eyes begging for a shred of mercy. But there was no mercy in his boss's eyes, only contempt. Respect? You dare talk about respect after what I just heard? You're a disgrace, Mark. Not only have you made a mockery of our personal relationship, but you've also shown your true colors as a man. She spat, her words laced with disgust. I'm sorry, truly sorry. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. Please, give me another chance. Mark begged, his voice barely above a whisper, his figure small and defeated on the floor. The boss shook her head, her decision as firm as her stance. A mistake? No, Mark. This was a calculated move on your part, and it's going to cost you. As of tomorrow, you are no longer employed at my company. And trust me, I'll make sure your reputation follows you wherever you go. No decent company will touch you after this, she declared, her verdict final. With that, she turned on her heel and left, her presence leaving a void that was quickly filled by a heavy, suffocating silence. One by one, Mark's colleagues followed, their quick glances of pity and disdain a clear sign of the social and professional ostracism that awaited him. And there he was, Mark, still on his knees, the mighty man reduced to a crumpled figure of defeat. I couldn't help but let out a laugh, not of joy, but of disbelief at the irony of it all. I began to gather my things, each item a token of the life I was leaving behind. Mark's eyes followed me, a mix of confusion and desperation in his gaze. Layla, please, don't leave me like this. I have nothing left. I need you, he begged, his voice a hollow echo of his former self. I stopped, my bag in hand, and turned to face him. Need me? Like you needed your boss, or your mistress, or your precious career? No, Mark. You've made your bed, and now you get to lie in it. Alone, I said, my words clear, my resolve unwavering. But Layla, I made a mistake. I can change. Please, he continued, his pleas a stark contrast to the man who once held the power in our home. I shook my head, a wry smile on my lips. Change? You don't need change, Mark. You need a miracle. And as for staying, you seem to have plenty of company without me. I'm sure you'll manage, I replied, my tone final, my decision made. Life had taken a turn for both of us, but in different directions. I found myself in a cozy apartment, small, but mine. I got a job, nothing fancy, but it was a start, a step away from the shadows of my past with Mark. Mark was in a tough spot. His boss had done a number on him. Everywhere he tried, doors slammed shut. His big-time career was now just a pile of dust. He was left picking up odd jobs here and there, nothing official, just enough to scrape by. His once lavish house was now just a big, empty space, no laughter, no life, just him and his regrets. I heard whispers about his young mistress. She was out as soon as the cash stopped flowing. Can't say I was surprised. Now, Mark was all alone in that big house, no one to clean up after him, no one to listen to his woes. But life was different for me. I rekindled old friendships, caught up with girlfriends I hadn't seen in ages. There were laughs, shared memories, and support, something I hadn't felt in a long while. One day, over coffee, a friend noticed the change in me. You're different, stronger, she said, a smile lighting up her face. I smiled back, feeling the truth in her words. Yeah, it's been tough, but I'm getting there. Thinking about getting some help, too. Talking to a psychologist, you know? She nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's great, really great. You're taking control, moving on. Mark's loss, totally. I chuckled, the sound light and free, Yeah, Mark's on his own path now. Heard he's barely getting by. His mistress left him, too. Her eyes widened. Seriously? Wow, that's rough. But you're doing good, right? Reconnecting with folks, thinking about therapy? I nodded, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. Yeah, it feels right. It's about time I took care of myself, you know? Life had changed, and so had I. The apartment slowly filled with traces of a new beginning. The job, the friends, the future therapy sessions, they were all pieces of a new life I was building, brick by brick. Each night, as I turned off the lights, I felt a sense of peace. I had faced the storm, emerged stronger, and was now ready for whatever lay ahead. A new day, a new challenge, a new horizon. Not as Mark's shadow, but as my own person, unafraid and undeterred, ready to write my own story. Growing up, I always knew where I stood in the family hierarchy. There was Jason, the golden boy, and then there was me, Nancy, the one who existed in the peripherals of our parents' proud gazes. Jason was everything a parent could dream of, his looks could have landed him on magazine covers, and his wit and charm made him the apple of our parents' eyes. Look at him, Nancy, Dad would often say, his eyes following Jason as he moved with an effortless grace. Your brother's going to make history. He's got that spark, you know? I'd nod, forcing a smile, my voice a mere whisper in the shadow of Jason's brilliance. Yeah, he's amazing. Mom was no less enamored. Dinner conversations always centered around Jason's accomplishments. Did you hear about Jason's new achievement, Nancy? She'd start, her voice tinged with excitement. He's top of his class again. A real genius, our boy. That's great. I'd respond, my words often drowned out by the next wave of praises for Jason. My own achievements, though decent, never seemed to make waves. They were just gentle ripples that faded quickly against the shore of Jason's triumphs. It wasn't that they didn't love me or care for me. It was just that Jason's light was blinding, casting a long shadow where I stood, quietly observing, quietly learning. I remember one evening, trying to share a piece of my world. I won the school art contest today, I murmured, hoping for a sliver of their attention. That's nice, dear. Mom replied, her smile sincere, but fleeting. Could you help set the table? The conversation swiftly shifted back to Jason's recent debate victory. I did what I always did, I helped set the table, my mind wandering to places where my achievements weren't just background noise. In those quiet moments, when the house hummed with the tales of Jason's adventures and dreams, I found my own space, my own peace. It wasn't that I didn't have dreams or aspirations. It was just that mine didn't shine as brightly in the family spotlight. Nancy, you know we're proud of you too, right? Dad once said, his voice softer, as if he sensed the unspoken feelings that hung like delicate cobwebs in our conversations. I know, Dad, I replied, my voice steady, my resolve clearer than ever. I'm proud of me too. And in that moment, I realized it. Being in the shadows wasn't a curse. It was a blessing in disguise. It was where I found my strength, my resolve, and my path. A path not illuminated by the glaring lights of expectation, but one that was lit by the steady glow of self-belief. The day Jason's world came crashing down, it started like any other. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, Dad was buried in the morning paper, and I was just about to leave for work. Then the phone rang, a sharp, shrill sound that seemed to slice through the normalcy of our morning. Mom answered, her usual cheery hello faltering as the words on the other end of the line sunk in. I could see her face drain of color, her hand clutching the phone like a lifeline. What are you saying? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. My Jason? That can't be. Dad and I exchanged worried glances, the air thick with tension. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and made his way to Mom. Honey, what is it? What's happened? It was like watching a dam break. The words poured out of Mom, each one heavier, more unbelievable than the last. "It's Jason, he's been arrested. They're saying he used his looks, his charm, to scam women out of their money." The room spun, the news hitting us like a physical blow. Jason, our golden boy, the pride of our family, a criminal? It didn't add up, it couldn't. But the weight of the truth was undeniable, pressing down on us, suffocating. Dad slumped back into his chair, his face the picture of defeat. How did we not see? All this time, we thought he was our perfect son, but we were blind. I stood there, frozen, the familiar feeling of being in the background now a twisted comfort. But this time, the background was a stage for a tragedy, a play where our family was coming apart at the seams. Mom was sobbing now, her body racked with guilt and disbelief. We failed him, we spoiled him. Gave him everything, never questioning, never doubting. And now, look what he's done. Her words were like bitter pills, hard to swallow. We had all played our parts in this, in one way or another. Our silence, our blind adoration, they had fueled Jason's fall, just as much as his own actions. I moved closer, my own shock giving way to a need to hold my family together. "Mom, Dad, this is hard. It's going to be hard. But we need to face it, deal with it. We can't let this break us." Dad looked up, his eyes meeting mine, a silent understanding passing between us. "Nancy's right. We need to be strong, now more than ever." We sat there, the three of us, bound by blood and a shared heartache. The golden image of Jason, the one we had all held on to, had shattered. Sitting at the old, creaky kitchen table that had witnessed so many family dramas, the air felt different, almost electric with change. Mom and Dad had called me over, their faces solemn, a stark contrast to the usual casual weekend dinners. "Nancy, we need to talk," Dad began, his voice unsteady. He was a man of few words, so the seriousness in his tone immediately set off alarms in my head. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she took mine. "Honey, your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. About the past, about how we treated you and Jason." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Discussions about Jason usually meant trouble or disappointment. But this felt different. There was a sense of confession in the air, a need for redemption. "We realized we weren't fair to you, Nancy," Dad continued, his eyes not meeting mine. "We were so caught up in your brother's life, his successes, and, later, his mistakes. We overlooked you, the steady, strong heart of this family." Mom nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "We're so sorry, sweetheart. We can't change the past, but we want to make things right, starting now. We've put aside some money for you, for your education, for your future. It's not just an investment, it's our way of saying we see you, Nancy. We always should have." The words washed over me, a mix of emotion swirling inside. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to maintain the sturdy, independent facade I'd built over the years. But another part, a softer, more vulnerable part, felt seen for the first time in a long while. "Mom, Dad, I don't know what to say," I stammered, the walls I'd carefully constructed around my heart starting to crumble. "Say you'll accept it, Nancy. Say you'll let us do this one thing right," Mom urged, her voice thick with emotion. So, I accepted, not just the money, but the olive branch they were extending. College was a whirlwind of late-night study sessions and early morning classes, but every challenge, every triumph felt doubly sweet. It was my journey, but it was also our journey, a silent pact between my parents and me to mend the frayed edges of our family tapestry. Graduation day was a scene I'd replay in my mind for years to come. Mom and Dad in the audience, their applause drowning out the rest, their faces alight with pride, not just in my achievements, but in our collective healing. Madam Wilson, my students would greet me each day as I entered the classroom of the prestigious private school where I taught. My heart would swell with pride, not just for the title, but for the journey it represented. Life found a new rhythm, a comforting routine of teaching, grading, and quiet evenings in my rented apartment. The savings account for my own place grew slowly but steadily, a testament to my perseverance and independence. During weekend dinners at Mom and Dad's, the conversation flowed more freely, the laughter more genuine. We were rediscovering each other, learning the contours of our lives beyond the shadow of Jason's tumultuous legacy. "You're really making a difference, Nancy," Dad would say, his eyes shining with sincerity. "Those kids, they're lucky to have you." "And we're lucky to have you, honey," Mom would add, passing me another serving of her famous lasagna. "You've brought so much light into our lives, especially when things seemed the darkest." And as for Jason, he was like a distant echo, a memory that had lost its sharpness over time. His name rarely crossed our lips, and when it did, it was met with a somber acknowledgement and a quick shift to brighter topics. Life has a way of throwing punches when you least expect it. That's what happened the day I lost Dad. It was a day like any other until it wasn't. The phone rang, shattering the calm of my morning routine. It was Mom, and the tremble in her voice told me something was terribly wrong before she even spoke. "Nancy, it's your dad," she said, each word soaked in grief. He's had a heart attack. He's gone, Nancy, he's gone." The world stopped. Just like that. Dad, the steady rock of our family, the quiet force that held us together, was gone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was listen to Mom's sobs on the other end of the line. "I need you, Nancy. Please, I need you here," she pleaded, her voice a lifeline in the midst of my own swirling despair. "I'm coming, Mom. I'm coming right now," I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. My mind replayed a million memories, each one a sharp reminder of what we'd lost. Mom was a wreck when I got there, her tears a silent testament to the love she'd shared with Dad for all those years. "We didn't even get to say goodbye, Nancy," she cried, her words breaking on each sob. "He was fine last night, and now he's just gone." I held her, two pieces of a puzzle, trying to hold each other together. There were no words, no comfort to be found in the usual platitudes. So, we just stood there, holding on to each other, the silence speaking volumes. The days that followed were a haze of arrangements and condolences. Relatives and friends came and went, each one trying to offer some solace, some sense of normalcy in the face of our raw grief. "I can't believe he's gone, Nancy," Aunt Linda said, her eyes red from crying. "Your dad was such a good man, a real pillar of the community." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "He was the best, Aunt Linda. The best." And then there was the matter of Jason. The brother who'd cast such a long shadow over our lives was nowhere to be found. Mom, despite everything, had reached out to him, a mother's love overcoming even the deepest hurt. "He didn't even care, Nancy," she told me, her voice hollow. "He just asked about money, about inheritance. As if your dad's life was just some transaction." The anger that flared within me was fierce and protective. "Forget him, Mom. He made his choices. We're better off without him." The funeral was a quiet affair, just a few close friends and family. The absence of my brother was a silent scream in the midst of our mourning, a final proof of the divide that had grown between us. After everyone else had left, Mom and I stood by Dad's grave, the finality of it all hitting us like a physical force. "He loved you so much, Nancy," Mom said, her hand gripping mine. "We both did. We both do." I squeezed her hand back, the gesture a promise, a vow. "I know, Mom. And I love you. We'll get through this. Together." Life was different after that. The house felt emptier, the conversations quieter. But in that quiet, there was also a sense of unity, of two people coming together, sharing a loss, and somehow finding a way to keep moving forward. Life after Dad's passing was like walking through a fog. Me and Mom, we were trying to pick up the pieces, make sense of a world that had tilted on its axis. That's when the greed we thought we'd left behind came knocking. I started noticing it, subtle at first. Mom would get these phone calls, her face turning all shades of worry as soon as she saw the caller ID. She'd step into the other room, her whisper seeping through the walls, laced with tension and unease. "Mom, what's going on? Who keeps calling?" I finally asked one evening, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was like watching a dam break. Mom's facade crumbled, the truth pouring out in a torrent of pent-up fears and guilt. "It's Jason," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been calling, asking for money. I've been sending it to him, Nancy. I didn't want to worry you." My heart sank, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. Jason? After all this time, after everything, he has the nerve to ask for money? Mom nodded, her eyes clouded with regret. I know it's wrong. But he's my son, Nancy. I couldn't just turn him away, not completely. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside me. Mom, we can't do this. We can't let him bleed us dry. He didn't even care enough to come to Dad's funeral. His greed, it's got no end. The decision was made. Next time Jason called, we'd put an end to it, once and for all. The phone rang, right on cue, Mom's hand shaking as she answered. Jason, listen. She started, her voice stronger than I'd heard in a long time. I can't do this anymore. There's no more money. You need to figure things out on your own. The response was a barrage of insults and threats, Jason's voice a venomous hiss spitting through the phone. But Mom stood her ground, her resolve a newfound armor against his greed. After she hung up, the silence that followed was heavy, loaded with the weight of a severed tie, a final break from the son who'd chosen his path, a path of selfishness and greed. Just when we thought we'd weathered the worst of the storm, life hit us with another cruel blow. Mom, she'd been the glue holding me together after Dad passed, but her heart, it seemed, was more fragile than we knew. I found her that morning, peaceful like she was just sleeping. But I knew, the silence in the house screamed it, she was gone. The pain, the loss, it was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind right out of me. I called Aunt Linda, my voice a shaky whisper, Aunt Linda, it's Mom, she's passed away. The line went quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy with unspoken words. Oh, Nancy, she finally said, her voice thick. I'm so sorry. Your mom, she was one of the good ones. The days that followed were a blur. There were arrangements to be made, people to call. The same people who'd just offered their condolences for Dad were back, their faces etched with shock and sympathy. I was running on autopilot, doing what needed to be done, but inside, I was screaming. How much loss can one person take? First Dad, then the betrayal of cutting ties with Jason, and now Mom. The funeral was a quiet affair, just close friends and family, the air thick with grief and whispered prayers. And once again, the gaping absence of Jason was like a dark cloud, a stark reminder of the choices he'd made, the family he'd turned his back on. After everyone else had left, I stood there alone, the weight of my new reality pressing down on me. Aunt Linda came over, her hand gentle on my shoulder. Nancy, you're not alone in this, she said, her voice firm. You've got family, people who love you. And your parents, they'd be so proud of you, of the woman you've become. Her words, meant to comfort, were a small light in the darkness. But the path ahead was mine to walk alone, a road paved with memories and what-ifs. The house, once filled with the laughter and warmth of a family, now echoed with silence, each room a reminder of what had been, of what was lost. But in that silence, there was also space to breathe, to grieve, and eventually, to heal. The grief was still raw, the loss of Mom like a wound that refused to heal. That's when Jason decided to make his grand return, not with condolences or apologies, but with demands and arrogance. I heard the knock, loud and impatient, echoing through the empty halls of the house that had once been filled with love and laughter. I opened the door, and there he stood, my brother Jason, looking every bit the part of the prodigal son, except there was no remorse in his eyes, just greed and entitlement. "Nancy, long time no see," he said, his voice dripping with a false cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him was his wife, her makeup as bold as her husband's audacity. "Jason," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "What are you doing here?" He smirked, a look that made my skin crawl. "Well, sis, now that the old folks are gone, I figured it's time to settle the family affairs. Starting with this house." His words hung in the air, heavy with implications. His wife, standing there like a vulture waiting for its share, chimed in, "Yeah, sweetie, why don't you just pack up your things and make it easier for everyone?" I felt a flare of anger, hot and fierce. "This is my parents' house, my home. You have no right to barge in here and make demands." Jason's smirk widened. "Oh, come on, Nancy. We all know Mom and Dad would have wanted me to have this place. I'm the eldest, after all." I shook my head, disbelief and anger mingling in a potent mix. "You have some nerve, Jason. You didn't even bother to show up for their funerals, and now you just waltz in here expecting to take everything?" His wife snorted, her voice sharp and cutting. "Look, let's not make this harder than it has to be. You've had your time here, now it's our turn. We'll be back in 3 days to move in. I suggest you're not here when we do." They turned to leave, their laughter a bitter sound that echoed in the empty halls of my parents' house. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a mixture of grief, rage, and disbelief coursing through me. But as the door closed behind them, a resolve settled in my heart. This was not just a house, it was my heritage, my parents' legacy. I wouldn't let Jason and his greed tarnish their memory, wouldn't let him destroy what they had built with love and sacrifice. I picked up the phone, my fingers dialing the number of Aunt Linda, Mom's lifelong friend and confidant. "Aunt Linda, it's Nancy. I need your help. Jason's back, and he's after the house." Her voice, strong and steady, was a comfort in the storm. "Don't you worry, Nancy. I'll be right over. We'll sort this out, you and me. We won't let him get away with this." As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination took hold. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight, not just for the house, but for the dignity and memory of my parents. The air was tense as Aunt Linda and I sat in the living room, waiting. We knew they were coming, the 3-day ultimatum Jason had given was up. When the sound of a car pulling into the driveway reached our ears, we exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that we were in this together, come what may. The knock on the door was forceful, demanding. I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and opened it. There stood Jason and his wife, their expressions a mix of arrogance and impatience. "Time's up, Nancy," Jason said, his voice cold. "Pack your things and get out. This house is ours now." His wife sneered, adding, "Yeah, you heard him. Move it, or we'll make you." Aunt Linda stood up, her presence commanding, despite her age. "Jason, you ungrateful man," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything? You think that's what your mother would have wanted?" Jason's face twisted into a sneer. "And what would you know about it, huh? You're just her nosy sister." Aunt Linda's laugh was bitter, filled with years of watching a family torn apart by greed. "I know more than you think. Your mother made me the executor of her will. She knew exactly what kind of man you'd become." She waved an envelope in front of Jason's face. He snatched it from her hands, tearing it open with a viciousness that made my blood run cold. Aunt Linda's laughter filled the room again, her eyes twinkling with a mix of triumph and sadness. "Oh, Jason, you really thought you could bully your way into a fortune? That was just a copy. The original is safe with me, and another copy with the notary. Your mother's wishes are clear and legally binding." She took another copy of the will from her pocket, reading aloud the words that sealed Jason's fate. The house, 200 grand, it was all mine, a final gift from a mother. Jason's anger erupted like a volcano, his words a stream of venom and desperation. This is a joke, right? He stammered. Everything to Nancy? And all I get is a Bible? You can't do this to me. That's my money, my house. You have to share it. But I stood firm, my resolve hardened by years of being overlooked and underestimated. This is Mom's will, Jason. Her final decision. And I'm honoring it, whether you like it or not. His wife pulled at his arm, her eyes darting nervously. Let's just go, Jason. This isn't worth it. But Jason was beyond reason, beyond understanding. It took the threat of calling the police to finally make them leave, their retreat a mix of anger and disbelief. As they drove away, Aunt Linda turned to me, a gentle smile on her face. Your parents would be proud, Nancy. You stood your ground. I looked around the house, my house now, feeling the weight of my parents' legacy, of the responsibility that came with it. I knew then what I wanted: a family of my own, children to love and guide, to raise with the same strength and integrity that had gotten me through the toughest of times. Life had come full circle, and as I stood there, in the home that had seen so much joy and pain, I was ready for the future, ready to build a legacy of my own, one filled with love, fairness, and the quiet strength that had been my companion through it all. I'm Lucy, and if you'd told me at 22 that my life would be a whirlwind of silent battles and unspoken words, I would have laughed it off. But here I am, at 34, living a story far removed from the dreams I once had. It all began at a friend's birthday party, fresh out of college, with a heart full of dreams. That's where I met Tom. He had the kind of smile that could stop you in your tracks and a laugh that made you feel like you were in on the world's best joke. Never thought I'd meet someone who could beat me at Mario Kart, he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief as he handed me a controller. I laughed, taking up the challenge. Prepare to be amazed. I'm the reigning champ of college dorm tournaments. We clicked instantly, our banter as easy as breathing. It wasn't long before our families became one big, happy unit. Tom's parents, Mike and Sarah, welcomed me with open arms, their warmth enveloping me like a cherished family heirloom. After we got married, life's script took an unexpected turn. Tom and Sarah were old school in their thinking. A woman's true calling is at home, Sarah would often say, her voice gentle but firm. I had other plans for my life, career goals I wanted to achieve. But love, I reasoned, was about compromise. So, I traded my ambitions for a domestic life, telling myself it was just another kind of adventure. Then Emma came into our lives, a bundle of joy that I thought would complete our family picture. But Tom's reaction to our baby girl planted the first seed of doubt in our perfect garden. I always imagined having a son to carry on the family name, he said, looking down at Emma with a distant gaze that didn't match the situation. I felt a twinge in my heart but masked it with optimism. Next time, we'll have your boy, I replied, hoping to bridge the gap his words had created. However, life had other plans. My health took a turn, shutting the door on any future pregnancies. The disappointment in Tom's eyes was palpable, an unspoken barrier that started to rise between him and Emma. As the years passed, Emma blossomed into a spirited, independent girl, wise beyond her 7 years. She found joy in cooking, her little hands creating dishes that would surprise and delight Mike and Sarah. "Grandma, Grandpa, try the cookies I made," she'd say, her face alight with pride. "Delicious, sweetheart. You're going to be a famous chef one day," Mike would exclaim, his eyes gleaming with pride. But Tom's reactions were lukewarm, at best. He'd nod, murmur a half-hearted nice, and go back to his world, a world that seemed to have no room for Emma. One evening, as I was tucking her into bed, her voice trembled with a question that shattered my heart. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy like my cooking? Why doesn't he love me?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing for the right words. "Honey, Daddy does love you. He has a different way of showing it." It's not your fault, okay? You are amazing, and don't you ever forget that. But even as I said the words, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. Was it really just about showing love, or was there something deeper, a chasm we couldn't see but only feel? The clock's hands seemed to move slower each evening, the tick-tock a loud reminder of the growing void in our home. Tom's late returns had become the norm, his presence more like a shadow than the partner I once knew. The house, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now echoed with the silence of our unspoken tensions. One chilly evening, as I heard the familiar jingle of Tom's keys at the door, something inside me snapped. The frustration and loneliness I had bottled up for so long demanded to be heard. "Tom, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but my hands trembling. What we're doing, it's not living. You're never here, and when you are, it's like you're a million miles away. He sighed, a sound of annoyance more than exhaustion. "Lucy, not this again. I'm out there, every day, grinding away for this family. Can't you just be grateful for that?" His words stung, a harsh reminder of the chasm that had formed between us. Grateful? For a husband who's more a ghost than a partner? For a father who's just a name to his own daughter? I shot back, the hurt spilling over. Tom's face hardened, his eyes cold and distant. "You wouldn't last a day in my shoes, Lucy. You sit at home, in your little bubble, while I deal with the real world. Don't lecture me about being a partner or a father." I bit my lip, fighting back the tears. This wasn't the man I married, this angry stranger who wore Tom's face. I wanted to scream, to shatter the icy calm that had enveloped him, but fear and the need to protect Emma from more hurt kept me silent. The distance between us grew, a silent gulf filled with the things we didn't say and the love that had once bound us. Tom's move to the spare room was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. Our bed, which had once been a haven, now felt like an empty stage after the final act, the audience long gone. In the midst of this growing void, Emma became the only light. Her success at school, her sharp mind, and joyful heart were my anchors in a sea of uncertainty. "You're incredible, Emma," I told her, my voice thick with pride. "You deserve something special." The smartphone was more than a gift, it was a lifeline, a connection to a world that was still bright and full of possibilities. Emma's delight at the present was a balm to my weary heart. "This is awesome, Mom. Look at all the stuff I can do," she exclaimed, her fingers flying over the screen, her laughter a melody in our muted home. I smiled, but my heart was heavy with a secret. "Just remember, sweetheart, this is our little secret." "Dad, well, you know how he feels about these things," I cautioned, hating the deception but fearing Tom's unpredictable temper more. Emma's eyes met mine, a mirror of understanding far beyond her years. "I won't tell him, Mom. I promise," she said, her small hand squeezing mine in a silent pact. The idea of Tom taking Emma on a camping trip hit me out of the blue. It was a sunny Saturday morning when he brought it up, the kitchen filled with the smell of pancakes and coffee. "Emma, how about you and I hit the mountains next weekend? Just the two of us, a father-daughter adventure," Tom announced, his tone surprisingly cheerful. Emma's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Really, Daddy? Just you and me?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. I watched the scene unfold, a knot of worry forming in my stomach. Tom and outdoor activities were as likely a pair as oil and water. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Tom? You know the mountains can be unpredictable this time of year," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Tom shot me a look, his eyes briefly flashing annoyance, before settling back into a forced smile. "Lucy, I know what I'm doing. It'll be good for Emma and me to spend some quality time together." I turned to Emma, who was practically bouncing in her seat. "Sweetheart, it sounds like an adventure, but you have to promise to be careful, okay?" Emma nodded vigorously, her smile wide and genuine. "I promise, Mom. And Daddy knows everything about camping, right, Dad?" Tom ruffled her hair, his response a little too casual. "Of course, kiddo. Your old man's got a few tricks up his sleeve. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Tom seemed more engaged, discussing camping gear and trails with a level of enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. But as the departure day drew closer, my anxiety grew. The mountains were beautiful, but unforgiving, and the thought of Emma in that vast wilderness tugged at every maternal instinct I had. The morning they left, I packed Emma's bag with extra care, double-checking her warm clothes and first aid kit. "You sure you've got everything, Tom? Map, compass, emergency contacts?" I asked, my voice barely hiding my concern. Tom nodded, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Lucy, relax. We'll be fine. It's just a couple of nights. What could possibly go wrong?" His words, meant to reassure, only heightened my unease. I hugged Emma tightly, whispering reminders and "I love yous" into her ear. "Mom, I'll be okay. I'm a big girl now, remember?" Emma said, her bravery a stark contrast to the fear in my heart. "I know, baby. Just take care of each other, okay?" I replied, forcing a smile as I watched them drive off. The house felt empty without Emma's laughter and endless chatter. I busied myself with chores, but my mind was in the mountains, trailing behind my daughter and the husband who felt like a stranger. The door creaked open, and the sight of Tom standing there alone, his face ashen and eyes hollow, sent a chill down my spine. My heart skipped a beat, my mind racing with the worst possibilities. "Tom, where's Emma?" I asked, my voice quivering, trying to steady myself against the kitchen counter. He stumbled into the living room, his words jumbled, his hands shaking. "Lucy, I lost her. In the mountains. We were hiking, and she's gone." I felt the ground beneath me give way. "What do you mean, gone?" I demanded, my voice rising in panic. "Tom, how could you lose her? She's just a child." His face crumpled, the weight of his guilt and fear written all over it. I turned away for just a second, I swear. When I looked back, she wasn't there anymore. I searched, I called out. "Lucy, I did everything I could." Anger and terror surged through me, a torrent of emotions I couldn't contain. "And you just came back? Without her? Why didn't you call the police, the rangers? Anyone?" He sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. "I was scared. Scared they'd blame me, think I'm a bad father. I didn't know what to do." Without another word, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands were trembling, but my voice was surprisingly calm as I reported Emma missing. Every second felt like an eternity, each tick of the clock a sharp reminder of the nightmare we were living. Soon, our quiet home was filled with the sound of sirens and the urgency of police officers. Tom's parents, Mike and Sarah, arrived, their faces etched with worry and disbelief. "Lucy, what happened? Where's our little Emma?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she reached out for me. I shook my head, the tears finally breaking through my carefully held composure. "She's lost, Sarah. Lost in the mountains because he wasn't careful enough." Mike wrapped his arm around Sarah, his gaze fixed on Tom with a mix of confusion and anger. "Son, tell us this isn't true. Tell us you know where your daughter is." Tom looked up, his eyes red and his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I messed up. I don't know where she is. I don't know how to fix this." The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken accusations and fear. As the police began their questions, organizing search teams and gathering details, I felt a numbness settle over me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. But as the night wore on, with no news and the darkness outside mirroring the despair within, the harsh reality settled in. My little girl, my Emma, was out there alone, in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. As the search for Emma dragged on, the house felt like it was closing in on me. Every second was a sharp jab to my heart, every minute an endless stretch of worry. And Tom, he was there, but not really. His eyes glued to his phone, fingers tapping away. It was like he wasn't even in the same world of panic and fear that was swallowing me whole. "Tom, what are you doing? Our daughter is out there, and you're just texting?" I snapped, frustration boiling over. He didn't even look up. "It's work, Lucy. It doesn't stop just because of this," he mumbled, his words like a slap to my already raw nerves. Work? At a time like this? It didn't sit right. But then it hit me. Emma's phone, the one I gave her, the one we kept a secret. It had GPS. Emma's phone. She has it with her. We can track her, I exclaimed, a flicker of hope cutting through the dense fog of despair. Mike and Sarah perked up, their worn-out faces showing the first signs of hope since the nightmare began. "That's brilliant, Lucy. Call her, see if she answers," Mike said, his voice a mix of hope and urgency. I dialed Emma's number, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the ring. But there was no answer. She didn't pick up. I tried again, and again, nothing but the cold, impersonal ringing. Panic surged again, but then I remembered the GPS. I relayed the details to the police, every part of me trembling with a cocktail of fear and hope. And then, after the longest hour of my life, a miracle. The search team, they found her. They brought my baby back, alive and unharmed, her little face calm, despite the ordeal she'd been through. I broke down, holding her so tight I feared I might never let go. "Emma, baby, why didn't you answer your phone? We were so worried," I sobbed, the relief overwhelming every other emotion. She looked up at me, her eyes wise beyond her years. "I was saving the battery, Mommy. In case it took longer to find me. I knew the GPS would bring you to me." Her smart thinking, her calmness in the face of danger, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. She was her own little hero. Mike and Sarah hugged us both, their relief palpable. "You're one brave girl, Emma. You made it through," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. And Sarah, her eyes wet with tears, added, "You're our little miracle, Emma. We're so blessed to have you back." But amidst the joy and relief, I couldn't help but glance at Tom. His reaction, it wasn't right. It wasn't the overwhelming relief or the desperate joy of a parent who found their lost child. It was something else, something that didn't fit the picture. Before I could think of that thought, Emma, her small frame still trembling from the night's events, looked at her father and said something that stopped us all in our tracks. "Daddy left me there on purpose." The room went silent, the air thick with the weight of her words. Tom let out a nervous laugh, but it sounded hollow, forced. "What are you talking about, Emma? That's a serious accusation." I looked at Emma, my heart pounding. "Honey, what do you mean? Tell us everything." Emma's gaze was steady, her voice firm, despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. "I heard Daddy on the phone. He was talking to someone about getting rid of me." The world seemed to spin, each word from Emma's lips a sledgehammer to the life I thought I knew. Mike and Sarah looked at their son, their faces a mix of horror and disbelief. "Tom, tell me this isn't true. Tell me our granddaughter is mistaken," Mike said, his voice a low growl of a father protecting his cub. Tom's face was pale, his usual composure shattered. "Dad, I can explain." But before he could spin his web of lies, Emma took out her smartphone, her small fingers deft with certainty. "I recorded it. I was scared, and I didn't know what else to do." The recording was clear, Tom's voice discussing a chilling plan with a cold detachment that made my blood run cold. My world, once filled with love and trust, was crumbling around me, each word from the recording a painful blow. Sarah was sobbing, her hands covering her face. Mike stood, his body rigid with fury. "How could you, Tom? She's your flesh and blood." Tom fell to his knees, his mask of indifference finally crumbling. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. It was all her idea," he pleaded, but his words were like ash, meaningless and cold. The police arrived, their blue lights painting the night with flickers of justice. As they led Tom away, his pleas and excuses fading into the night, I held Emma close, her bravery and quick thinking a stark contrast to the cowardice of her father. The interrogation room at the police station was a cold, uninviting space, its stark walls echoing the chilling confessions that unfolded within. I sat there, a silent observer, as the detective methodically unraveled the tangled web of lies and deceit that Tom had woven. "So, let me get this straight, Mr. Wilson." The detective's voice was stern, unyielding. "You conspired with your mistress to abandon your daughter, hoping that she would freeze or that wild animals would find her?" Tom's face was pale, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a look of desperation. "It wasn't like that. I mean, yes, but it was her idea. She said it was the only way we could be together, without the complications." "Complications?" The detective raised an eyebrow. "You mean your daughter, your own flesh and blood? You mean alimony?" Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "She's pregnant, she's going to have a boy. I just wanted a fresh start. I didn't think it would go this far." I felt a surge of anger, each word from Tom's mouth a testament to his betrayal. How could the man I once loved, the father of my child, be capable of such heartless cruelty? The detective leaned in, his eyes fixed on Tom. "Your plan failed, Mr. Wilson. Your daughter survived, thanks to her own resourcefulness and a smartphone with GPS. What do you have to say about that?" Tom's silence was deafening. The reality of his actions, the enormity of his betrayal, was finally sinking in. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. In the courtroom, as the judge delivered the verdict, a sense of surreal calm enveloped me. Tom and his mistress were sentenced to prison, their futures a bleak canvas of regret and retribution. In addition, the judge ordered Tom to pay a substantial sum for his unforgivable betrayal and mandated alimony to support Emma. Outside the courtroom, the sky was an endless expanse of gray, mirroring the storm of emotions within me. Mike and Sarah approached, their faces etched with pain and disbelief. "Lucy, we can't begin to express our sorrow." Mike's voice trembled with emotion. "We raised Tom to be a better man than this. We're here for you and Emma, whatever you need." Sarah's eyes, red from crying, met mine. "Lucy, we're so sorry. If we had any idea. Please, let us help make this right." I nodded, the weight of their words heavy on my heart. "Thank you. Your support means everything. But right now, it's Emma who needs us the most. We need to show her that, despite everything, she's not alone." As we left the courthouse, the world seemed to move in slow motion, each step a tentative move towards an uncertain future. Emma's hand in mine was a silent vow of strength and unity, a promise that no darkness could ever overshadow the bond we shared. The days after the trial were like walking through a fog, each step uncertain but forward-moving. The house that once echoed with Tom's presence now felt strangely peaceful, the turmoil he'd brought with it gone. One morning, as Emma and I sat at the kitchen table, the sun casting a warm glow through the window, she looked up at me, her eyes reflecting a wisdom far beyond her years. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" she asked, her small hand reaching across the table to mine. I squeezed her hand, feeling the strength that flowed between us. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. We have each other, and that's all that matters." Emma smiled, a hint of the carefree child she once was peeking through. "I miss Grandpa Mike and Grandma Sarah." "Do you think they're sad too?" The mention of Mike and Sarah tugged at my heart. "I'm sure they are, honey. But they love us, and they're there for us. Maybe we should visit them soon, what do you think?" Emma's face lit up, the idea of seeing her grandparents bringing a spark of joy. "Yes, let's do that. Grandpa always makes me laugh, and Grandma's hugs are the best." The sound of laughter and chatter soon filled the house, a stark contrast to the silence that had preceded it. As we prepared for our visit, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we'd been through. "Mom, will things ever be like before?" Emma asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice as she packed her little backpack. I knelt down, meeting her gaze. No, sweetie, it won't be like before. But that's okay. We're starting a new chapter, just you and me. And sometimes, new beginnings are even better than what we leave behind. Emma nodded, her understanding far beyond her years. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. More than anything in the world, I replied, hugging her tight. As we drove to Mike and Sarah's, the familiar streets seemed to hold a new promise. The door opened even before we could knock, Mike and Sarah standing there, their arms open, ready to envelop us in their warmth. Lucy, Emma, come here, my darlings, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion as she pulled us into a tight embrace. Mike ruffled Emma's hair, a smile breaking through his usual stoic demeanor. You're one tough cookie, kiddo. Just like your mom. The day passed in a blur of shared stories, laughter, and the occasional tear. It was healing, a balm to the wounds that were slowly turning into scars. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, I knew that the road ahead would have its bumps and turns. But with Emma by my side, and the love and support of family, each step would be a move towards a future filled with hope and new possibilities. Mom, look at the sunset. It's like the sky is celebrating with us. Emma exclaimed, her face aglow with the fading light. I looked at the sunset, then at Emma, and I knew she was right. This wasn't just a new dawn for us. It was a celebration, a testament to our strength, our resilience, and the unbreakable bond that no darkness could ever overshadow.
I remember the day like it was yesterday. The office was buzzing with the news of a new department head arriving. That's when I first laid eyes on Michael. He walked in with an air of confidence, like he owned the place. I was crunching numbers at my desk, buried in spreadsheets and tax forms. You must be Anna, the star accountant I've heard so much about, he said, extending his hand. His voice was calm, his grip firm. Yeah, that's me. And you're the new boss, huh? Big shoes to fill, I replied, shaking his hand. He chuckled. I sure hope I can fill them. So you gonna show me the ropes around here or what? I raised an eyebrow. Maybe, if you're lucky. We hit it off from there. Work conversations turned into coffee breaks, and coffee breaks turned into late-night chats. That's when he told me about his sister, Elise, and his nephew, Lucas. They're everything to me, Anna. Just a heads up, they're a package deal with me, he said earnestly one evening. I love family. I'd like to meet them sometime, I responded, not knowing what I was signing up for. It wasn't long before I got my wish. Elise was striking, but her presence was cold, like a winter breeze that you can't shield yourself from. So you're the accountant, she said, her voice laced with a hint of disdain. Michael says you're good with numbers. Sounds boring to me. I forced a smile. Well, we all have our talents. Accounting is mine. Lucas was a whirlwind, a 3-year-old with energy for days and manners yet to be learned. I watched as he ran around, his laughter filling the room, while Michael looked on with adoration. He's a spirited one, isn't he? I remarked. Michael chuckled. That's one way to put it. He's my little champ, can do no wrong in my eyes. The wedding was modest, just close friends and family. I thought marrying Michael meant I was getting a partner, but it felt more like I was joining a club where I didn't know the rules. We moved into his house, right next door to Elise's apartment. I learned quickly that Michael paid her rent, something about wanting to keep family close. Elise's visits became more frequent, her presence in our home more imposing. Michael, why is Elise here all the time? Doesn't she have her own place? I asked him one evening. He was nonchalant. She's my sister, Anna. She needs us. I'm all she's got after her messy divorce. Plus, she's got Lucas to think about. I suggested, maybe I could help her find a job. It could be good for her, you know, to have something of her own. That's when I saw a side of Michael I hadn't seen before. His voice was sharp, his eyes stern. Don't you dare, Anna. Elise's life is her business, not yours. Stay out of it. I was taken aback. Okay, Michael. I didn't mean to overstep. I just thought... He cut me off. Just drop it, Anna. It's not your place. I let it go, thinking maybe it was just the stress of adjusting to our new life together. I didn't realize then that it was the beginning of a pattern, a cycle I was about to be trapped in. Elise's visits grew more frequent, if that was even possible. She'd waltz in like she owned the place, at any hour, without so much as a knock. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge like it was her own. "Elise, don't you think you should at least call before coming over?" I said, trying to keep my tone light but firm. She shot me a look, her hand on her hip. "Listen, Anna, this is practically my second home. Michael doesn't mind, so why should you?" "It's not about minding, it's about privacy, respect. We need our space too," I replied, feeling my patience wearing thin. Elise scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Space? You married into this family, sweetheart. Space is a luxury you gave up. Get used to it." I was seething, but before I could retort, Michael walked in. "What's all the commotion about?" he asked, looking from Elise to me. "It's about your sister thinking she can just barge in here anytime she wants," I blurted out, unable to hold it in any longer. Michael's face turned serious. "Anna, I've told you before, Elise is family. This is her home too, in a way. Can't you just get along?" I was stunned. Get along. Michael, it's not about getting along. It's about boundaries, respect. Doesn't that mean anything to you? He sighed, running his hand through his hair. Of course it does, but she's going through a tough time. We need to be there for her. Elise smirked, enjoying the scene. See, Anna, Michael understands. Maybe you're the one who needs to adjust. I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. It was like banging my head against a brick wall. Fine, have it your way. But remember, this is my home too, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. The days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Elise's entitlement grew, and so did my resentment. One day, Lucas, now a whirlwind of mischief and tantrums, decided my vase was his new toy. The crash was deafening, the pieces of the vase scattered like my patience. Lucas, that was not yours to break, I exclaimed, my voice stern. Elise rushed in, her protective mother bear mode in full swing. What did you say to my son? She demanded, her eyes blazing. I told him off for breaking my vase. He needs to learn to respect other people's property, I retorted, standing my ground. Elise was fuming. He's just a child, Anna. They make mistakes. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. A child needs to learn, Elise. If we don't teach them, who will? I argued, feeling the weight of the situation. Before it could escalate further, Michael stepped in. Okay, let's all calm down. It's just a vase. We can replace it. As I swept up the broken pieces of the vase, I realized I was also trying to piece together a sense of normalcy in a home where the lines between respect, family, and intrusion were constantly blurred. It was a balancing act, and I was the tightrope walker, treading carefully, wondering when I would finally fall or if I'd ever find the balance I so desperately sought. Life at home started feeling like walking on eggshells. The arrival of our daughter Lily was supposed to be the light at the end of the tunnel. I thought maybe, just maybe, having our own little one would shift Michael's focus, make him see things differently. I was wrong. One evening, I brought up the subject of Lily's future. Michael, we need to start putting money aside for Lily's college. She deserves every chance we can give her, I said, cradling her gently in my arms. Michael glanced at Lily, then back at his phone. Yeah, sure. We'll open a joint account or something. But don't go overboard with the saving. We've got plenty of time. It wasn't the enthusiastic agreement I'd hoped for, but it was something, or so I thought. Elise's grip on our life only tightened. She'd stroll into our house whenever she pleased, treating it like her own personal diner. I'd find dishes scattered, leftovers gone, the aftermath of her impromptu visits. One day, the sound of Lily's cries cut through the house. I rushed to find Lucas, now more rambunctious than ever, yanking her favorite toy away, his face twisted in a mean grin. Lucas, stop that right now! Give it back to Lily, I commanded, my voice laced with anger. Elise appeared in a flash, her eyes narrow slits. Why are you picking on my son? He's just playing. Can't you see that? He's not playing, Elise. He's being a bully. Doesn't that bother you at all? I snapped, frustration boiling over. Elise laughed. A cold, harsh sound. Bother me. Why should it? Kids will be kids. You'd know if you weren't so busy playing the perfect mommy. Before I could unleash the torrent of words building inside me, Michael walked in. What's all this noise about? Anna, why are you attacking Lucas? I couldn't believe my ears. Attacking? Michael, your nephew is terrorizing our daughter and you're worried about me attacking him? Michael's face darkened. Lucas is just a child, Anna. Stop making mountains out of molehills. And watch your tone. You're not talking to one of your spreadsheets now. I was stunned into silence. My husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my equal, was taking sides against his own daughter. Your sister walks in here like she owns the place. Her son treats our daughter like dirt, and I'm the one who's wrong, I asked, my voice trembling. Michael stepped closer, his voice a low growl. You heard me. Elise is going through a lot, and I won't have you adding to her stress. You're the one who needs to adjust your attitude. The room spun around me. This wasn't just about a toy or a broken vase. It was about my husband, the father of my child, choosing his sister's happiness over our daughter's well-being, over our family's peace. As I held Lily close, her sobs soaking into my shirt, I realized the balance I'd been seeking was a farce. There was no middle ground, no compromise. In Michael's world, Elise and Lucas reigned supreme, and Lily and I. We were just living in it. The realization hit hard, a bitter pill I wasn't ready to swallow. The scales weren't just tipped. They were completely overturned, and there I was, left picking up the pieces, wondering how I'd let it get this far, and where we'd go from here. Years had trickled by, each day a stark reminder of where I stood in the pecking order of Michael's priorities. Elise and Lucas always came first, their needs and whims overshadowing our little families. I'd learned to live in the shadows, but what I couldn't stomach was watching Lily grow up feeling like she was second best in her own father's eyes. Lucas turned 18, his high school days behind him, college on the horizon. Lily, just 14, was blossoming into a bright, ambitious girl, her dreams of becoming a doctor getting more vivid with each passing day. We'd been squirreling away every penny into her college fund, or so I thought. That day, something nudged me to check the account, a gut feeling I couldn't shake. The numbers on the screen made my world spin. 2/3 of Lily's future, her dreams, our promises, gone. Numb, I scrolled through the transactions, each entry a stab in the heart. Michael had drained the account, the lifeline we'd promised our daughter. I waited for him, the betrayal burning a hole through my chest. Michael, the college fund for Lily, it's nearly empty. Why? He didn't flinch, his voice as calm as a predator's. Lucas is going to college. He needed the money. The room spun around me. But that was for Lily, our daughter. How could you do this without even asking me? His glare was icy. It's my money too. I don't need your permission to help my family. Your family, I echoed, disbelief wrapping around me like a shroud. Isn't Lily your family? Doesn't she matter to you at all? He scoffed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Elise and Lucas need me more. They're my responsibility. Lily, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped in, her voice a mix of confusion and hurt. Dad, am I not your responsibility too? Don't you care about my future? Michael's reply was a blade, sharp and cold. Elite and Lucas will always come first. That's just how it is. The room fell silent, the truth hanging heavy like a storm cloud. Lily's eyes, once bright with hope, brimmed with tears, each one a silent accusation against the father who'd failed her. I looked at Michael, really looked at him, and saw the stranger he'd become. My husband, who was supposed to be my partner, my equal, had made his choice, and in doing so, he'd shattered the fragile facade of a family we'd tried so hard to uphold. As Lily's sobs filled the room, a clarity settled over me. This was the tipping point, the moment when the veil lifted and the ugly truth revealed itself. We weren't a family, we were just extras in the backdrop of Michael's unwavering loyalty to Elise and Lucas. The revelation about the college fund wasn't just a breach of trust. It was the catalyst that set everything in motion. The facade of our family life, already cracking, began to crumble piece by piece. In the days that followed, the house was thick with tension, each of us walking on a tightrope of unspoken words and raw emotions. Lily, once bubbly and chatty, grew quiet, her eyes losing the sparkle that once lit up the room. And Michael, he carried on as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't just turned our world upside down. One evening, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "Michael, we need to talk about what happened," I said, my voice steady but firm. He didn't even look up from his paper. "What's there to talk about, Anna? It's done." I felt a surge of anger. "Done? You think you can just wipe away what you did? You stole our daughter's future, Michael." He shrugged, the gesture so casual it made my blood boil. "I didn't steal anything. It was my money, too." "Your money?" I echoed, incredulous. "What about Lily? What about her dreams, her future?" He finally looked at me, his eyes cold. "Lily will manage. She's smart. She'll find a way." I stared at him, the man I once thought I knew, now a stranger sitting across from me. "And what if she can't? What if your decision ruins her chances?" He let out a harsh laugh. "Life's tough, Anna. She might as well learn that now." That night, as I lay awake, the weight of his words crushing me, I knew something had to change. I couldn't let Lily's dreams be another casualty of Michael's blind loyalty to Elise and Lucas. Like clockwork, Elise barged into our house the next day, her smug grin stretching from ear to ear. "Well, well, look at that. Lucas is off to a fancy college, thanks to Michael. Too bad for Lily, though. Guess she'll have to hustle for scholarships or something." She snickered, her voice dripping with malice. I bit back the anger rising in my throat. "You think it's funny, Elise? You're here laughing while my daughter's future hangs by a thread?" "Oh, lighten up, Anna. It's not the end of the world. Michael did what he had to do. His nephew needed him," she said, her indifference stinging like salt in a wound. It was then she let something slip, a number that didn't match up. The amount she casually mentioned Michael gave her was way less than what had vanished from Lily's account. My mind raced. Where did the rest of the money go? I couldn't let it go. Not this time. I hired a private investigator, a quiet man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Find out where the money went," I told him, handing over the account statements. "Find out what he's hiding." It took 2 weeks of waiting, each day longer than the last. Then the investigator came back, his face grim. "I found what you're looking for," he said, passing over a file. "The contents made my world collapse. Michael wasn't just betraying me financially. He was having an affair." Armed with the evidence, I stormed over to Michael's sanctuary, where he was probably basking in the safety of his sister's support. Without a knock, I pushed the door open and threw the divorce papers in front of him. "Michael, we're through. This is where it ends," I said, my voice eerily calm yet seething with a rage that had been simmering for years. Elise, who had been watching the scene unfold with a smirk, let out a laugh. "Good riddance, Anna. Michael was too good for you anyway. Right, bro?" Michael, however, didn't share her amusement. "Anna, I'm done with you. I'll sign the papers and you get out of my house. Take Lily and leave." His words, meant to wound, only strengthened my resolve. It was then I played my final card, the ace I'd been holding close. "Not so fast, Michael. I have something else for you." I handed him the evidence of his infidelity. "And just so you know, I'll be seeking compensation for this betrayal. Your boss might be interested to learn about your little escapades, especially since it involves his wife." The color drained from Michael's face, his arrogance evaporating like mist under the sun. "Anna, please. I'm begging you. Let's sort this out. You can't do this to me." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The time for begging was over. The time to act was now. You made your bed, Michael. Now you get to lie in it. As I turned my back on the crumbling facade of the life we had built, I felt the weight of the past years lift off my shoulders. It was a bitter end to a chapter filled with lies and deceit, but it was also a new beginning. A beginning where Lily and I could step into the light, leaving the shadows of Michael's betrayal far behind. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Michael's face when he realized the magnitude of what was at stake was a picture I couldn't erase from my mind. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about securing a future for Lily that her father had so carelessly gambled away. I sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers in front of me, when Lily walked in. Her eyes, once filled with innocent joy, now held a maturity that no 14-year-old should have. "Mom, what's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice steady but her hands trembling ever so slightly. I reached across the table, taking her hands in mine. "We're going to get through this, Lily. It's going to be tough, but we'll make it. We're a team, remember?" She nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "Yeah, team us. But what about Dad? And college?" I squeezed her hands, my resolve firm. "Your dad made his choices, and now he has to face the consequences. As for college, we'll figure it out. I'm not letting anything or anyone ruin your dreams." The legal battle that ensued wasn't pretty. Michael's lawyer was slick, his arguments crafted to paint Michael as a victim, but I held my ground, the evidence and the truth on my side. In the courtroom, Michael's eyes met mine, a silent plea in their depths. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about righting a wrong, about standing up for my daughter. "Mrs. Carter, can you confirm that these transactions were made without your knowledge or consent?" the judge asked, his gaze piercing. "Yes, Your Honor. I had no idea until it was too late," I replied, my voice unwavering. "And the evidence of infidelity presented here, can you attest to its authenticity?" I nodded, feeling a mix of pain and triumph. "Yes, Your Honor, it's all true." The gavel came down like thunder, the sound marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In light of the evidence presented, I'm ruling in favor of Mrs. Carter. Mr. Carter, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution for the misappropriated funds and additional compensation for emotional distress. Michael's face was a mask of shock and defeat, but Elise, who had come to support her brother, was livid. "This isn't fair. You can't do this to him," she shouted, her voice echoing in the courtroom. The judge's gaze was unyielding. "It's not about what's fair to him, Mrs. Carter. It's about what's fair to his family, the ones he betrayed." As we walked out of the courtroom, Lily's hand in mine, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't a victory, not in the true sense, but it was a step towards healing, towards rebuilding what had been broken. Michael's life unraveled after that. His boss, upon learning of the affair, showed him the door. Without his job, his world, once so carefully constructed, began to crumble. And as for Elise, her once lavish lifestyle, funded by her brother's generosity, was now just a memory. She was forced to find work, to stand on her own 2 feet for the first time in years. But for Lily and me, it was a new beginning. We'd walked through the fire and emerged stronger, our bond unbreakable. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but we had each other. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together as a team. Because in the end, that's what family is all about. Not the ties of blood, but the bonds of love and the promise to always stand up for each other no matter what. The world had turned upside down. Michael, once so sure of himself and his choices, was now scrambling to keep his head above water. Juggling 2 jobs just to make ends meet, his days of comfort and complacency were long gone. One evening, I saw him at the grocery store, looking worn out and tired. His cart was filled with basic necessities, a far cry from the luxurious items he used to bring home. "Anna," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion, "I didn't expect to see you here." I looked at him, the man who had once been the center of my world, now a stranger fighting his own battles. "Life's full of surprises, Michael. Looks like you've got your hands full." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "Yeah, it's been rough. With Elise and Lucas moving in, things are tight. I'm doing what I can." The mention of Elise brought back a rush of memories, none of them pleasant. I heard she's working at the store down the street. Must be a change from her days of leisure. Michael nodded, a hint of embarrassment in his eyes. "It is, but she had no choice. I can't cover everything anymore, not after everything that's happened." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction, seeing the consequences of their actions finally catching up. Well, actions have consequences, Michael. You're learning that the hard way. He didn't argue, the reality of his situation evident in his weary posture. "I know I made mistakes, Anna. Big ones. I just hope someday Lily can forgive me." I thought of our daughter, her resilience and her determination shining through despite the storm she'd weathered. Lily's focused on her future, on becoming a doctor. She's moving past this, past you. And so am I. Michael looked at me, a mix of regret and realization in his eyes. "I guess that's fair. I miss her, Anna. I miss both of you. I shook my head, the finality in my voice clear. You made your choices, Michael. Now you have to live with them. Lily and I were doing just fine without you. As I left the store, I felt a surge of pride. Pride in how far Lily and I had come, in the strength we'd found in each other. Michael's world might have been crumbling, but ours was just beginning to rebuild. Lily's graduation was just around the corner, the culmination of her hard work and dedication. The dream of her becoming a doctor was no longer a distant hope, but a tangible, nearing reality. And as for me, I was content knowing that the storm had passed, and in its wake, it had left us stronger, more resilient. The aftershocks of Michael's decisions would still ripple through our lives, but they no longer had the power to shake our foundations. We had each other, and that was more than enough. As we looked to the future, to the new chapter waiting to be written, I knew that whatever came our way, we would face it together, as a team. Because in the end, that's what family is all about. Not the ties that bind you, but the love that holds you together through the best and worst of times.